Good afternoon. It is December 30th, 2020. Ryan Ray, Chris Fenton here, coming to you from Texas and California, respectively, wherever you may be. Thank you for tuning in. Chris, I guess we did a post-Christmas show. You had on your Christmas sweater, but have you lost those magical 8 pounds that you gained over the Christmas holiday?
No, I put on a few more. So, yeah, I'm going to have my work cut out come New Year's. But that's the fun of all of this, right? So, yeah, we're in Los Angeles, which happens to be, I guess, COVID chaos central for the United States. So we actually hopped in a car with another family we've been very close with and drove down to a little place called Rancho Santa Fe and just sacked up in a house there with a swimming pool and stuff and just enjoyed hopefully staying healthy and happy but we did fatten up a little bit, and that's all right. It's the holidays, you got to enjoy it. So plus we don't know what's going to come with 2021. I think there's a lot of challenges out there, a lot of hope that 2021 is just going to be boom, blink with an eye, a completely different year and everything awesome. I'm going to go with that optimistic sort of feel too, in the way that I hope for that stuff. But I do think there's a lot of challenges to come. And unfortunately, we haven't put the COVID situation fully behind us yet either. But we also got China sitting there staring at us, not only next year, but for every year that we're going to be around for too. So anyway, we should talk about some of that stuff and start getting everybody thinking right for 2021.
Well, it's interesting because I think you sent a tweet a minute ago saying that we're going live, and the China news is like its own machine, like it's on its own timetable, its own line. Of course, China is so on such a different time schedule than we are that their news is breaking, and then we're reacting to the news. So it kind of creates this vicious cycle of you're trying to keep up what happens there, and then by the time it's reacted to here, it's its own thing, and then it's reacted to back there, and then you have Europe in the middle, and so it's just kind of a weird. It's not like following DC where you get up in the morning, you kind of know what's going on, and then Friday it tapers off. China seems like 24/7, 365. There's always something going on. And there's been a lot of stuff.
True. By the way, it was a little like Gordon Gekko said in the original Wall Street. Money never sleeps. China never sleeps. In fact, when I look at the way when I wake up in the morning, I'm usually up around 5, something like that, and I'm catching up with some people in China in the Hong Kong area, hearing what's going on. I read the South China Morning Post and of course the Global Times and the other stuff just to get that point of view. And then you roll into a lot of the European publications, particularly. I like The Guardian, various others over there, and then you have the Australian papers too, and then you start to see the East Coast feed. So it's interesting to sort of see the perspective, the points of view, and the different news items that come up every day. It's like I told Clay Travis a couple months ago, I'm like, covering China is almost like covering sports, like all of sports, not just NBA or NFL. It's like constant news, constant fodder for conversation for sure too.
Yeah, and there's experts for like every little aspect of U.S.-China relations, European-China relations, China itself. So, last Saturday, I guess it was, when we were talking, we were kind of wrapping up, and we kind of got into a discussion, I think, on air about bringing jobs back to the U.S., and we're up against the clock, so we get to finish that. So let's maybe pick up there, because that is something that the new president coming in, obviously we have the EU and China, and I haven't looked. I've been actually getting a chicken ready to cook for tonight, so I haven't looked at the news in the last hour or two. But the EU and China, like they're getting close to a deal. Trump wanted to bring jobs back from China. That was kind of some of his talking points, and you can debate over how many left and came or whatever. But there is a sentiment in America about bringing these jobs back, and you seem to be in that camp. And we kind of got out of time, so let's kind of start there. So, what is your thoughts on bringing jobs back? Why do you think it's a good idea, bad idea? Is it case by case? How would you like to articulate that argument?
Well, look, I mean, it's super complicated. And it's what I talk about quite often, which is this idea of decoupling from China is just sort of a ridiculous, sort of plan, because it's not very practical, and it would be really damaging to the United States just as much as China. So the idea is like, how do we untangle the web in a way that's pro-America and pro-Western ally? But let's talk about America since we're both here right now. How do you become pro-America, disentangle and decouple in a certain amount of ways that really fortifies the strength of America and builds long-term health, off the backs of a good bilateral relationship, right? For instance, you go back to the early 1800s when the United States was taking full advantage of the European countries to try to kickstart our industrial revolution. And there's lots of IP that we stole and tech swap and theft and various other protectionist policies that we implemented to catch up to them. But once we did, Europe stood up to us and they said, hey, enough is enough. You have built your economy into one of the best of the world. Now let's level the playing field. And one of the reasons they did that is because off of their backs, we created this great American economy and this great industrial ingenuity and all this other stuff. So the way Europe saw it was, hey, they screwed us over, but you know what? We helped them get there. And now they're a viable trading partner where we can start to get our money back for that effort. And I think that's the same way we need to think about it as Americans is, hey, China did a lot of bad stuff that wasn't good to us whatsoever. But they have caught up to us in many ways as a developed economy. So now that they have, let's say enough is enough, let's get tough with them, but let's make money off of that market and let's do it in a way that's pro-America first. And we can do that because we've seen it done 200 years ago in a different trading partnership. So that's where I'm looking at it. And when you talk about repatriating jobs and so on, we can get into more of the specifics, but I'm curious to hear your point of view on that first.
Yeah, so I think, as you say, there's multiple levels, and I hate talking about this because it's like a 4-hour speech you have to give of all the qualifications and caveats that you're not saying before you can get to what you are saying. So essentially, in essence, I would say that the Americans have been lied to, and so from our side, the thing that's hard is the reason that the jobs went to China. There's a lot of reasons. But the main reason is money. It's more profitable for these corporations to go to China and to get the cheap labor and sell the goods back at a higher profit here. Let's put the IP theft and all that on the side for a second. That's important, but just for a side. So if you bring those jobs back and you're paying someone in China $2 an hour, you're going to pay someone what's been wage $7 an hour, $15, $20 an hour for a union job. So you're going to pay someone go from 2 to 15 to 20. I doubt those corporations are going to eat the difference between $2 and $15 or $20 an hour for pay, which means that they're going to charge it to me and to you and everyone else, which means that we're going to pay more money. So it's going to cost us more to bring the jobs back. And so I don't think that whether it's Trump or Obama or whoever else, no one has really ever said that we have priced ourselves out of the market on some of these jobs. And if you want to bring them back, that's fine. But are you going to then force the corporations to cut profits so they can bring the jobs back? And that's, to me, where it gets tricky, is that Americans want the jobs back. And I would just say this, is that the jobs that are over there that we're talking about bringing back, they're not that they're bad jobs, but they're jobs that our economy has moved beyond. So let's encourage people to do better things and let those factory jobs go to emerging market nations where they need those type of jobs, and then encourage our people to figure out how to do new things with their free time. So to me, that's just the simple start there, because are you willing to it's going to cost Americans, make us more, it's going to take wealth from us by bringing those jobs back, is how I would view it.
Look, I think a lot of experts, whether it's like Max Kaiser on the Bitcoin side of things or Kyle Bass or various others, say that we simply exported inflation to China from the U.S. and that allows us essentially to buy all these goods and services that are made over there without it being inflated here to purchase, mainly because of the lower labor costs and also the lack of regulation. I mean, yes, we can get into the debate of over government reach and so on and so forth. But when you're in some of these first tier cities in China and you can barely breathe because the PPM is like 800 or 900, you realize that some regulation is actually pretty good. And when you have a country that's competing with yours that has none, it makes it very difficult to compete financially on that side of the equation. Now, what I will say is that I don't think we want the T-shirt factories back here. We don't want the no-skilled job, that type of labor here. What we do want, though, is to keep our IP and our intellect and our tech secured and not in a position where it has to be traded off to China in order to get access to that market. Because ultimately, what happens there is whether the companies that are U.S. are making the product in China doesn't become the issue. It becomes, does China then take that IP, take that technology, and start doing it themselves on that side of the Pacific? And a lot of that technology, a lot of that IP drives industries that create higher paying, more skilled labor. And that we need to definitely curb and try to end. The other thing that happens too is that in these forced JVs, a lot of times, and including forced JVs can occur with, for instance, movies like behind me, Looper and Iron Man 3, where in order to get access to the market for one particular movie or for a particular studio, you need to create the infrastructure on one given movie or a set of movies to help train their people on the ground to do below the line production, to do above the line production, which is below the line are the people behind the camera, typically above the line are the people in front of the camera, the people writing the scripts, et cetera. And as you teach them those processes and as they get better at it, they start to do it themselves. And that's where we need to be really careful, because we are essentially not giving them fish, we're teaching them how to fish, right? And that's creating this issue where we're losing our leadership in some of the various industries that employ good jobs. The other thing I'll add too is that, as we've seen with COVID, a lot of the supply chains that maybe have some skilled labor and some unskilled labor, I'm not exactly sure how pharmaceuticals, for instance, are made across the board, but when you're shipping supply chains that are crucial to American health, not the American health symbolically, but actually whether I'm coughing all day or not, or certain things that allow us to have a viable and workable healthcare system so that they're made in a country that is not an ally of ours, we start having problems. So there's various reasons why we need to bring the infrastructure back of certain manufacturing and certain jobs from China and obviously some of our other non-allies out there just because it's cheaper. That will cost consumers here more money, but it will also give us a longer sort of a longer time horizon where we're actually building a better health of the overall American economy and America itself. And that will be a great trade-off that maybe doesn't feel great for the stock market in a 3 to 6 month term, but it'll feel great for stock markets and everybody else over the course of 5, 10, 50, 100 years.
Yep. So let's go to the IP thing, because to me, that's what's interesting, that the U.S. companies complain about the IP theft, but they know most of the IP theft they're talking about, they know is going to happen. It's just forced on them. And so they go over there and they say, I want to pay, Chris $2 an hour. And in exchange, I get to turn over what percentage of my IP to you guys. And then the Chinese take it, they duplicate it, and all the things you say. Most Americans think that the Chinese, and this does happen, are like hacking the computers on a daily basis, and they're sitting in spies, they're downloading stuff. Okay, some of that's going on, but the real problem is the forced IP turnover. And American companies are going over there knowing it's going to happen, and then they complain to the Americans saying, hey, man, China's taking all my stuff. It's like, well, you knew this going into it. And so for me, it's hard to be sympathetic to these big corporations because they got in bed with the mob and the mob's just whacking them. And so I have a hard time being sympathetic to them. So when you're saying it's best for Americans, I understand that, but I'm also saying that these corporations are not doing what's best for America. And so I'm not entirely convinced that, helping them get back over here or whatever is going to help us in the long run either, because they're just complaining about essentially doing business with the mafia. And it's much like the Europeans with Russia. The Europeans keep buying gas from Russia, and then they want the U.S. to protect them. It's like, well, if you don't want Russia, then don't buy stuff from Russia. Guess what? That will actually hurt the Russians.
Well, I think there's a number of issues that you bring up there. I mean, number one is we use the stock market as our scoreboard, right? And to do anything on a long-term basis that actually has long-term health benefit, is almost impossible to evaluate any way but negative on a short-term quarterly basis or even on a daily basis with a stock, because that thought process, that ability to think forward in the future about what's best for the company 5 or 10 years down the road involves essentially the version of what used to be around a lot in the United States of America called R&D, or research and development. Research and development has been very cut by companies, mainly because it's terrible for bottom lines. It doesn't create great EBITDA, it doesn't create great profits, and shareholders don't like it. They want the maximum returns on the shortest term basis possible. So we're gonna have to think, number one, is there some sort of patriotism before capitalism version that we can all live with? I mean, I'm a free market capitalist. I actually don't think our system of capitalism is very free market. It's actually very heavy-handed by the government, and I have a real problem with that, number one. And number two is, I don't have a problem if there's a situation where it's free market capitalism versus what's best for the country. Like, I think companies that have been born and raised and have the ability to thrive based on what makes the United States of America great should have some sort of prioritization towards what's best for what created them in the first place, right? And I'm not saying that you go overboard and you do all kinds of free stuff for everything and you give in to whatever the government asks you to do. It's simple, basic logic of saying, okay, what's best for the country? Are we doing that? Or is there a version of it that works both with the country and capitalism? And let's do it. And part of the way that can be governed is by talking about it publicly, by allowing shareholders to have access to those information and those discussions, have journalists available to that. Because if people knew some of the tech swaps, some of the forced JVs, I mean, I was on Maria Bartiromo, I guess it was like 7 months ago, and I said, and they were talking about how great the Shanghai theme park was for Disney. And I said, well, yeah, it's great, except they only own 43% of it. And she's like, what? No, Right. And if people knew that that was the trade, including shareholders, you could argue there would be enough pushback on making that type of deal to come up with something better, right? But it's all done just in the C-suites or with various individuals based on what's going to be best for the performance of the stock without understanding or having the common investor or the common person or the journalists out there or anybody keeping an oversight of this from knowing about it. And it's not some sort of nefarious, like planned, greedy, corporate capitalist C-suite move. It's just the way it has been done this far. Right now, what we should do is mandate that these things are done more out in the open so there can be better discussion about what the best path forward is.
Yeah, so a couple things. One, on the the quarterly reports, I agree fully. The SEC should be abolished tomorrow. Like, they are, if you ever go look at what they do and how vague their guidelines are, and what an atrocious organization they are. They're the ones who require the quarterly reporting. Just so we're clear, like, they're the ones who make us do that. So they're the ones who are hampering some of the things you say. And that's as a libertarian, it's easy for me to pound on the government. But that's part of the thing is like, okay, well, some of these problems are caused by our own government. Our own government's making us do things a certain way. To your point, I do agree. Transparency, and that's why when we talk about the big corporations coming back, more of my I want to point out is that they knew what they were getting into on some level. Now, they may not like the results. Maybe the turnover happened a little bit faster than they thought, but they knew what they were getting into. You and me and everyone else, we didn't know back in 94, 2002, 2012. We didn't know until we kind of got in the game and like, oh, this is how the game works. Once you're in the game, you realize that everyone in the game knows, you just didn't know. And so the transparency, that's part of the show, right? We're here to talk about, say that, hey, these people know this. So how then do you fix it? And that I think is the hard part, because I do want there to be some responsibility for their standpoint for doing things that they knew probably would hurt them. And so it seems that you want to be a little bit more sympathetic to them than I do. We got a question here.
Well, and by the way, just to add to that, and Joe, thanks for your comments, by the way. To go one step further, not only did you talk about how we started to find out that this is how it worked in 94, but stupidly, and I'm very vocal and public about it, I sort of bought into the whole idea. Like, this was globalism at its best. Open that market to every product and service you can. No matter how it worked, it was going to be in the best interest of the United States of America. And then slowly over time, and I compare it to like maybe cigarette smoking or something, where maybe 40 years ago, they said, hey, it's really healthy and you just smoke every day. And then one day somebody, puts out a report, oh my God, it's killing you. And you're going, oh, wait, I didn't know that. I thought it was supposed to be good for me. So the point of it is that, none of us really understood the ramifications of globalism and sort of this rampant capitalistic instinct to open the market, other than we thought it was good for America. And then over time, in particular, I look at the Daryl Morey tweet, which sort of woke me up to the NBA's Cowtown. And I go, well, wait a minute, we were doing the same thing. That's crazy. And then you look at things like, just in my business, the movie market, where we had 90 cents of every dollar coming from Hollywood movies back in, 2010, and then cut to last year, not 2020, but 2019, it was only 35 cents of every dollar. So what does that mean? Oh, it means we've been teaching them way too well. They've been picking up all our process. They've been using IP or various versions of it as a ripoff to create movies for their particular market, and we're getting shut out. And you see that in every industry, whether it's electronics, whether it's aircraft, whether it's automobiles, you name it, it's getting done. And now we are woken to it, right? Everybody that's in the interaction business of US and China in that trade, we know that it's going on. The one reason that a lot of people aren't speaking about it is because there's so much money to make. But all we need to do is flip the way we think and say, well, wait, yeah, we want to make money off of them, but we also need to think like Americans, and we need to be good to the country that's been good to us first. And there's a way to do it if we're smart about it, right? Like, there is a way to be, innovative and make both things work, but we've been too lazy and just focused on making money.
Okay, so I want to address that, but first, Joe does have a question. Do these exporting companies, and this show is live on Twitter, Facebook, so if you can find it, you can comment. Do these exporting companies hide behind fiduciary responsibility? I'm not 100% sure what you're asking there. So do you any insight on this, Chris?
Well, I think what Joe is asking is that if you're a C-suite executive, you can say, my bosses are shareholders and the investors and the board of directors that I report to that are in charge of making sure investors and shareholders are all pleased. So if this is a way to make our profits better, to increase our revenues, make our EBITDA better, in fact, it keeps showing that we're growing more and more in China, that allows our multiple to be bigger. Yes, I would argue that you can hide behind fiduciary responsibility all day long. I guess what I'm arguing for is there should be a combo of patriotic responsibility and fiduciary, because without this country, if we just let China run away with everything, we're not going to have the foundation of a country to support these companies anyway. So at some point, we're going to hit the end of the ticking clock and we're going to have a real problem.
Okay, it seems like you nailed what Joe was asking here. Okay, so here's something that I'm thinking of. So we're in 2021, but 2020. Okay, how long? When was your first time in China?
2003, I think it was. So
it was pre-WhatsApp. BlackBerry maybe it was around. I don't know. 2003 was around, but okay. So my point is that even in 2003, if you came to this realization and you said, you know what, I don't want to do it this way anymore, the ability for you to communicate that was not there. Amazon wasn't what it was today. You couldn't go self-publish a book. You couldn't start a podcast. I mean, you could do some of these things, but they were really hard, right? So part of what's happened under the guise of the back room happened because the people who did know about it and did want to raise it, they need the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, New York Times to run an article. And if they would run an article, and I can tell you, those publications are just, they all have their own fingers and pots as well. So they're not going to rock the boat every time either. They couldn't get the message out there. If we go to what we talked about 2 shows ago, I think it was, here is me and you talking about Australia getting screwed by China on coal and barley, right? So part of what China has been able to do and the C-suites have been able to do has been because the world just could not know. Those days are behind us. And so I think part of what has to happen is just the ability for people to know and to be educated and to talk about it, because that puts pressure on the C-suites in ways that we couldn't before. So if you go look at, who owns Disney, you're going to have 4 or 5 big PE groups that own a lot of stock in Disney, and they're kind of influencing things. But then as people realize, wait, hold on. Wait, so Mulan was here, they did this, they start asking questions. And if we know one thing about these publicly traded companies, they don't go by good press as any press is good press, right? They want good press is good press. And so I don't think that the power to do these deals in secret is there anymore. And I think China will find in the next 20 to 30 years that Africa's complaining, Australia's complaining, Asia's complaining. A lot of folks are going to complain, and they're going to have to bow to the will of the people. Whereas before, it was the elite with the elite making deals. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, that's 100% the case. I mean, I would argue. I mean, there were a lot of reasons that the NBA lost viewership this year, but I would argue that some of that might have been the hypocrisy of how NBA was dealing with China and dealing with the Hong Kong protesters and dealing with the Xinjiang province, et cetera. Like, there will be hits to pocketbooks in that kind of way. But then on top of it, if that type of public resentment towards hypocrisy is combined with journalistic coverage of it, which is combined with congressional sort of inquiry about it, that's going to create more and more pressure. And I think that is going to start to change the narrative of, hey, it can't just be about profits. Because there was a point in American history where clear cutting forests and dumping every amount of filth into rivers to generate as much profit as a factory or as a timber cutter or whatever it was par for the course. That's how you did it. That's how you made profit. But eventually there was enough of an uproar about it that said, and if it wasn't government regulations, it was people, NIMBY, not in my backyard, or people, that fishermen that were like saying, hey, I can't fish anymore because of this, whatever it was. It created a pressure to actually do the right things environmentally. And then, of course, we have various regulations and laws that came into too. But you could argue there was a public pressure to even get those regulations going, right? It must have been big enough to get that pushed through. The same thing would happen here with China. And I'd like to believe we could do it without government interference, right? We could do it with just simply the public, the press, government leaders, exposing it further, building that momentum, and starting to create this idea that investors and shareholders will start to realize, hey, they have to pressure these companies not only to make a profit and to do things that are in the best interest of their return on investment, but also they need to do something that works with the brand and the image of the company and how it's being a good citizen of the United States of America and the Western world.
Yeah, and so my big picture thesis here with China, North Korea, and any oppressive government is that we won't be alive 100 years from now. But 100 years from now, the type of totalitarianism that you see will no longer be allowed because you can't keep people in the dark. Where you had the Great Leap Forward, that's been since World War II, right? That's not that long ago. You can't have that anymore without people reporting on it, talking about the Uyghurs. We know about the Uyghurs, despite the CCP trying to prevent that. So I think that a lot of the stuff will be unwound. And so my reluctance to say bring the government in is because we can unwind it, as you say, ourselves. We can talk about it. We can blog about it, write posts. You can go on 100 shows, whatever. And we need to really value that platform because most people in America today, as we sit here at the wrap of 2020, they're frustrated with their government and the elite. Right. So to get the average American to put pressure on someone to do the right thing, I think today's probably is at its pinnacle of easiest to say, okay, hey, if you just go here, they're ready to go.
Right. Well, and you look at what's happening with Jack Ma and Ant and Alibaba and that crackdown, and we saw it a couple years ago with Dylan Wanda and Wang Jinlin, the chairman there, and how that crackdown occurred. We see it constantly as the government of China comes in out of nowhere and just stops the progression of these capitalistic companies from going any further because for one reason or another, they just said enough's enough. American companies have to look at it the same way, right? Like if you play everything right and you duck your head in the sand and, tick off the rest of the world, but you just play by China's rules, that's great until it's no longer great. And then when it's not great, you lost that market or you lost a big part of that market. And how are you going to explain that to the rest of the globe when you want the globe to start purchasing essentially what you lost out of China? That's going to get really difficult. And I feel like there's like a double-edged sword that we're seeing with this Jack Ma Alibaba thing where some C-suite might be going, oh man, we have to be extra careful with what we do with China because any little thing can create massive disruption with your business there. And then I'd imagine there's others that are saying, wait, why are we doing all this BS when like any day somebody could wake up in the CCP and just shut us down? Like, what are we doing? Right? This is a crazy, crazy game of chicken that we're doing right now. And it's probably not worth it because it's going to happen. We're going to get shut out of the market, or we're just going to get imitated, and we're going to lose everything, not only that we put into it, but on top of it, we're going to lose all the support we had around the rest of the world because we just kept kowtowing to the CCP.
It's interesting because if you look at the Alibaba stuff, you know, in the US, what happens is you kind of have young entrepreneurs, and then they hit it big. And then when they get big, what they do is they work with government to try to make sure the laws keep them in power, right? Because they need things to kind of keep them at the top. In China, it's the opposite. When you get to the top, you're almost the government's enemy, because then you pose a threat and the government comes in and wants to crack down and ruin your business. And so it's interesting to see how China handles these big, you know, China and India have more millionaires and billionaires than the world combined. I think, you know, there's a lot of rich folks over there. But once you get to the top, if you mess up just a little bit, they undercut you. And the thing that they do well about it is they use the sentiment of the people against you, right? And so if you go look at some of the reports, there's plenty of people on WeChat and the various platforms who have been very critical of these folks because they are, you know, not of the class and they're all this stuff. And so the CCP is very, very crafty to crack down on these folks. And so Western businesses have to be careful, because if they can do it to their own, they can definitely do it to a Western business. And oh my God, these people are not with us. And that's part of that socialistic mindset that you have to kind of understand how that works. And if you're going to undo that, you have to be very careful.
Well, you look at the Jack Ma reports where, I mean, the netizens or the people on social media have been really influenced by the government, the Ministry of Propaganda, to make what used to be Jack Ma was this rags to riches story that was put up on a pedestal by the CCP. Like, this is what the foundation of China can do for you if you are like Jack Ma and you really work hard. You figure out like something, you know, innovative, and you push it. We're going to create the foundation of an economy that allow you to be him someday. We're going to put him up on the pedestal. And now suddenly you're reading a lot of these reports of the netizen social media, you know, stories, and they're talking about how this guy, you know, was trying to take money from his, you know, from every grandmother, and he's all about being greedy, and he's not about the Chinese people, and blah, blah, blah. It's amazing. They just flipped the switch, and now he's persona non grata. So it's a great lesson for anybody.
I'm trying to find my quotations from Mao. That's a great book, and if I can find a link, I'll read it out. Just go reading quotations from Mao is a very good insight to how the propaganda has worked and how it works. But also this book right here, it's called "Strike Hard: Anti-Crime Campaigns in Chinese Criminal Justice" from 79 to 85, and it goes through how they tried to develop the legal system and the codes and stuff like that. And part of what you're seeing play out is what was done back then, and it's interesting because they basically, as you say, they turn you against the people, right? And so it's now that Chris is now the enemy of the people, and it's done at a scale where the people go, okay, wow, they are, you know, Chris Fenton is the worst. We got to pile on him. And so for Westerners who think that they're going to go in and overturn the CCP, that's not going to happen. I think that a lot of folks in the West might miss that as well. Like, China does not want to be America tomorrow. You know, it's not like if Xi Jinping were to die, they would be like, okay, you know, let's vote for democracy. So that's also a problem that we face there as well.
Well, I would say, look, the Ministry of Propaganda, and we talked about this before, is essentially if you put CNN and Fox News and Rachel Maddow and Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon and Don Lemon all together on the same message, and they just talked about that same message all day long. Right. So you have the whole population of China hearing the same message all day long. So I would argue that, knowing a lot of Chinese people, non-CCP members, they're very much like us. They like freedoms. They like certain things that I think are very democratic as far as aspirational qualities of a democracy. But they are messaged a certain thing all day long. So if we really wanted to overthrow the CCP, the best way is to figure out how to untangle certain things that are not healthy for the United States of America, yet still keep an ongoing trade of commerce between the two countries in a way that's pro-America first, okay? And then our cultural fabric, the things that make us a democracy, the stories, the aspirational qualities of it, the freedoms, et cetera, that culture, whether it's NBA or whether it's, televisions or film or music or whatever it is, that's important to keep getting in there, because that soft power is being let in through the Ministry of Propaganda. And there's a lot of stuff that they technically don't notice might be aspirational to people, that maybe should be censored in the way that they think. They'll censor certain things where there's criticisms towards China or whatever it is. But if there's something where, you're seeing a young protagonist in a movie, move from the small town and work their way up to running a big company, and they have a love interest or whatever it is, that sort of gets absorbed by the Chinese as, wow, that seems something that's a little freer for them to do than it is for me. I sort of like that, right? And over time, you could argue that soft power of cultural exchange can win them over a bit. But the real problem is getting the Ministry of Propaganda to stop the sort of antithesis of that language all day long, right? And that's where the real issue is. Like, until that machine is shut off, it's really tough to win over the 1.3 billion that aren't part of the CCP.
No. So I think we agree a lot here. So, and that's part of the reason I think doing business with China is so important, because the more business we do with China, the more times we have Americans in China over there meeting, having dinner, doing business deals, whatever, that soft power, to use your term, it's transferred, because those ideas of something that's, normal for me and you is not necessarily normal for them. We can do this, we can do that, whatever. We go there and criticize Donald Trump, and we lay it on him pretty hard. They're not going to do that unless they feel in a very safe environment. So those are things that you can just see. And also, to your point, sending over our athletes is interesting, because our athletes represent, the pinnacle of success. Most of athletes, are rags to riches type stories. People who come from inner cities, and they went really hard, and next thing you know, they're big, they're tall, they're strong, they're muscular, they're good looking, and then they're rich, they can do what they want to. So it is interesting that the CCP doesn't really see that as a threat, because it is quite the threat from that standpoint. But I think that's, to your point, we're not going to remove the Ministry of Propaganda. If we did today, it wouldn't change anything. But more conversations, because that's what the CCP, they tell you. That's what they're scared of. That's why they censor all of their stuff. They're afraid of people talking. So the people who say decouple from China, all you're going to get is more propaganda poured into China, right? And so the more that we can communicate, the better, the faster, if you will, we can unwind some of the propaganda.
Well, and that's what I mean, what's been tough on me about doing it. And by the way, self-publishing the book that I wrote, 10 years ago wouldn't have made any noise, right? But instead, it just so happened that enough time had passed. China's gotten out there. I got Simon & Schuster took the book out. I'm on TV. I'm talking about it. That's great. It's given me a good platform. But one of the real problems is, because we talk about disclosure and we talk about transparency, we talk about making things not a third rail. I'm a lone wolf in talking about Hollywood's kowtowing to China. I mean, there's various, like the PEN America report did a great report on it. There's various journalists like Sonny Bunch at the Washington Post, Isaac Stonefish, various others that are calling it out. But to get other industry players like me to speak openly about it has been really difficult. In fact, I have a CBS piece coming out soon, and we're having trouble having others, join on to that documentary, sort of segment. And, that's going to be needed in order to help push through thoughtful solutions, ways to be both genuine as Americans and pro this great country, yet also pro capitalism and pro taking advantage of this massive market we built. You have to talk about it. You have to throw out bad ideas. You got to throw out good ideas. Like, I love the fact that people comment on this show that we're tinkering around with right here, because I don't have the solutions. I don't have all the right ideas, but I will tell you, the more I get feedback about some of the things I throw out there, the more refined I can get. And, it was a real honor to work with Congressional China Task Force over the summer with their report that they did, because they wanted different points of views in that. That's all important. Like, we're all Americans. We're all working together to try to figure out the best path forward, but we need to talk about it openly. We need to be able to criticize bad ideas. We need to be able to compliment good ideas, and we need to formulate a strategy that thinks about this thing long term.
Yeah, and I would say this. So if you ask me today as a libertarian, I would say I want the freest global market in the world, everywhere to be a free market, right? The reality is I would not snap my fingers and make that happen tomorrow because it just wouldn't work. And so one of the things when you're talking about big ideas we have to consider is we might know where we want to go or think we might know where we want to go, but we have to take small steps to get there because the law of unintended consequences will kick in, right? So if we put it into the Ministry of Propaganda tomorrow in China, just to take that example, we had the power to do it. We actually don't know what the ramifications would that be. It might be worse than we thought. It might be better than we thought. We really don't know. So one of the things in these discussions is it's good to talk about big ideas and then small practical steps, and then also understand that, you know, step one might be in the wrong direction, but that's okay. So that I'm always in favor of small steps because small steps require small corrections. Whereas if you said, "Hey, we're going to decouple from China," you know?
Well, here's an easy example, like baby steps all the way. I 100% agree with you. Have that North Star, but no, you're never going to get to it if you can't baby step towards it, right? And you might not ever get to it. It's always good to have goals you can never accomplish because it allows you to keep progressing, right? But like a simple one, and transparency is key yet again. But it's as simple as the SEC saying, you know what, we're not going to allow China to work around these state secret laws that they hide behind in order to have the same accounting standards that every other company that's publicly listed in the United States has, right? Essentially, put them under the same guidelines as everyone else. That's pretty simple, pretty commonplace, and makes a lot of sense logically. Like, let's just do it. And there has been a push to do it. Yet, you know, you talk about lobbyists and the way companies try to work with, you know, the laws to make everything work the right way and continue the same sort of trajectory. Well, lobbyists have been very against that ability for the SEC to implement that across the board. And why? Because there's lots of money at stake. So I would say, hey, look, no one's bad for wanting to make money with the way the SEC has been looking at it up until now. I'm okay with that agenda. But let's talk about why we're okay with that as a country. Let's talk openly about what are the pitfalls for that. What are the things that are bad for the people on the other side of that equation, and why it's bad probably overall for markets in the long run. And let's discuss whether the majority of the benefits outweigh the majority of the ill effects, and then determine whether the SEC should still stay backed off or whether we should pursue this more fairness type of situation. The same, I would argue, with the WTO designation, as China's still a developing economy versus a developed economy. There's a lot of pushback for that redesignation. To me, it's pretty matter of fact, simple and logical to call them developed, but there's a lot of industries that are pushing against it. Why? Let's talk about why publicly. Let's hear it publicly. Let's get the public to understand it, and then let's determine the best path forward.
So on the SEC deal, I would say this, that this is a great question to ask, and we'll probably wrap it up here in a week. We go up against the clock. Insider trading is illegal. Now, I personally don't think insider trading should be illegal. We can go through that another show, but it is. However, if it's illegal, then how can you have companies that are based in China that are owned by the government, at least partially in some cases, listed on the stock exchange, and then the government officials are allowed to buy stocks? Like, how is that possible? That's the definition of insider trading, when they literally can make the policy to impact the company and then benefit the stock windfall.
Yeah.
So I would just say, like, those are the questions. Again, in 1997, maybe someone talked about it, but and of course the stock market was a little bit different then. But I'm saying, but those are the questions that people just can't ask. They can't think through. It's a complicated issue because people wouldn't agree with me necessarily about removing insider trading. But it is interesting questions that we can now ask. We can now put forth, and people can come back with, as you say, comments and questions and help you kind of carve off your thoughts. So, Chris, I'll give you the final word. Are we coming? Are we back tomorrow? I don't even know. Are we back tomorrow? Or are we off for the rest of the year?
I don't know. I can do it again tomorrow. I love doing this, and as long as people are interacting and enjoying it, I'm all for it. I think these are really important questions and answers to have, and discussions and so on. And by the way, I never get through any of the agenda I wrote out. It seems like we stop at number one, so we're gonna have to figure out how to bullet point this. But I will a great place to end. You brought up a different way to look at the SEC issue, a different way to look at what's wrong in that U.S.-China dynamic, and also, quite frankly, what's wrong for the way investors are treated, common investors in China that are trading these stocks versus CCP or government officials. It's sort of crazy. But I think that's a good way to finish off today, and let's cover more bases tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, thanks everyone. Hope you have a wonderful, well, it's almost evening, afternoon, evening, or wherever you may be. We'll be back tomorrow. For Chris Fenton, this is Ryan Ray. We'll talk to you then.